of the market of the cotton sector is actually planted with GM varieties or BT varieties, which actually offer a genetic solution to Lepidoptera control. So what we're now seeing is that the key focus for Lepidoptera control products is actually in the fruit and vegetables market. So genetic manipulation has actually altered the way that R&D is being approached. If we look at the fungicides line, 36, 30, 32, and if I can read that correctly, 18. So there has been an increase in actual fungicides kind of research, but again, a swing towards the more speciality, higher value fruit and vegetable markets. We're seeing the swing here. If you look at the market as a whole, though, this is reflecting market dynamics, because over the last 10 to 15 year period, the fungicides market on a global basis has caught up in terms of sales and actually overtaken the insecticides market. And this feeds back into the development of the industry as a whole, where, as we were saying before, in the late stage development countries, which I'm going to talk about further later on, Brazil, Russia, India, China, the financial guys like to call these the BRIC countries, which actually relies to them. But these are markets where the general economy is improving rapidly. People have more money to spend. They're buying more food. They want better quality food. What they want is yield and quality, and that is what's driving the fungicide market and the demand for new fungicide products in these markets. If we're looking at the average rate of new product introduction, though, you can see, sorry, I've made the same mistake. 12.3 products per annum were introduced in the 80s, 12.7 in the 90s, 10.1 in the 2000s, and if all the 42 products which are in R&D at the moment all come to the market in the next 5 years, which is what we expect, then that rate drops to 8.4 products per annum. So, whilst the demand for new technology and crop protection is there, the reality in the commercial world at the moment is actually we're seeing a slowdown in the rate of new products coming to the marketplace. Whether this be due to the swing to seeds and traits research, whether it be due to the regulatory environment, whether it be due to the commercial environment and actually making a return for these chemistries. On these chemistries, I think all of these have a role to play. And actually, when you look at it in the longer term, in the rate of new active ingredient introduction, this hasn't really doesn't show up in the big picture somewhat. Clearly, there was a big splurge of new products here. This was the sulfonylureas, the imidazolinones, the third generation triazoles. Then after that, we have a fairly straight line, although we are starting to see this tail off. And the statistics we had on the previous slide suggest that this is a continuing trend. Now, clearly, another factor in product availability and the farmer's opportunity to control pests, weeds, and diseases is affected by the re-registration situation. And I don't want to go through this in any huge amount of detail. But as we know, in Europe, there was a number of products called by 91414 for re-registration. Of those products, 503 of commercial significance went into the system. 281 have either been withdrawn or refused re-registration. And there are still a number of products in list 3 and 4 which are still awaiting their decisions, which may or may not actually make it through to the marketplace, and there's all kinds of manoeuvring going on in how these products are being positioned. New active ingredients also have to get an Annex 1 registration, but if everything actually makes it to the marketplace, we still only have 365 active ingredients on the market, well down from the 503 which are on the market before this situation started. Now, if you've seen this slide before, you'll see we've also added in biologicals, because we are seeing in the European market an increasing swing towards research in the biological sector. But whilst there are a significant number of products coming through, particularly on a percentage basis, at the present moment in time, from the commercial return on those products has not been great. Although clearly the demands of lower residues and perceived a more environmental perspective has actually created a pull-through potential for these products, which has created some of this research interest. Clearly, one of the factors, as we said before, is the rewriting of 91414. I'm not an expert in the regulatory position. I'm sure that Euros will help you out and his colleagues in the industry with this as well. But as I understand it, by next year this legislation has been enacted and we're moving from a risk-based to a hazard-based assessment, which is going to make the registration of new products and the re-registration of existing products significantly more difficult, particularly when products come round for their 7-year reviews and the new criteria kind of come into the assessment kind of position. Endocrine disruption, we believe, doesn't come onto the table till 2013, but that obviously does put a question mark against some products, although clearly at the present moment in time we do not believe there's an agreed on test which can be utilised to actually decide whether a product should be kind of go through or not under the endocrine disruption kind of problem. But clearly it's not all R&D. I mean, there is a significant amount of the market which is actually due to generic kind of products on the marketplace as well. But I think there's some interesting trends which are going on in this sector as well. Now, this is quite a complicated chart, and I'll explain it to you. If you look at the line for 2000 here, this is the sum of the sales of all of the active ingredients which were first introduced in 2000, the sales they achieved in 2009. So you're looking at an age profile of the sales of the crop protection industry. Now, if you accept that most products have 15 years of on-market patented life, you add that together, all of those sales, and you get to 25.2% of the industry is actually due to patented products. By definition, 75% is off patent, but it's not true to say that all of those are generic, because for many of the major products, particularly those recently off patent, the company which introduced them still has a dominating share of that product's sales, and our cut-off point is 90% of the product sales. Now, clearly you can't graph this really, because some products down here, like Paraquat, we believe Syngenta still has a 90% share of the end-use sales. Other products like Metamitron, which were introduced here, is a true commodity, so it crosses over. But the reason we put the break in here is because of this huge lump in 1972, which is glyphosate and all the other products which were actually introduced in that year. But there's still in 2009, over $5 billion worth of glyphosate sales due to Monsanto, which should really be counted in the more R&D side of the industry. When we look at the impact of glyphosate going from being a proprietary off patent to a generic product, you can see how the market's changed, and you can see how the generic share has actually increased with the increasing sales of glyphosate, although obviously 2009 wasn't a great year. But the interesting thing, I think, on this graph is the patented line, which you're looking at the blue one at the bottom, which you can see was relatively stable at about 30% of the industry, but in recent years has started to decline. Now, one of the premium reasons for that decline is actually the growth of the Chinese market, which is growing steadily in terms of value. And the majority of the Chinese market is actually still dominated by older commodity products, so it's feeding into the generic sector of the marketplace. You can see when some significant products have gone off patent, like imidacloprid and tebuconazole, how we've had a swing into the proprietary off-patent sector. Then in the last couple of years, we've had some significant new chemistry come into the marketplace. I mean, notably in the Rynaxypyr from DuPont, which is doing exceedingly well, which has driven the patented side, but which remained relatively steady in 2009. This does look like the market is getting more genericized all the time, until you look at just to kind of back up one sector. As we said, a lot of the commodity sector of the market was actually driven by the growth of the Chinese market. And what we're looking at here is the growth of the top 20 country markets worldwide, but in local currency. So we're taking out the currency exchange rate to the dollar kind of impact. And we're looking at the compound annual growth rate over the last 5-year period. And you can see that the fastest growing sectors of the marketplace, Russia, Brazil, China, India, the BRIC countries, also Argentina, Hungary, and some of the Central European markets, Mexico kind of also. So it's the late stage development countries who are actually driving the growth of the industry. And actually these are the markets which don't actually have such a larger share of the patented sector of the marketplace. So whilst the industry is growing, it is actually sectors which don't so readily accept new technology. When you look at the bottom, Korea, USA, UK, Spain, Japan, all the large-scale, rather mature developed markets are really relatively stagnant. Now, clearly, 2009 was a difficult year for the industry. If you put this graph for 2008 over 2003, I can assure you see the same shape exactly, but everything is shunted to the right. and that the more mature markets are actually positive in that 5-year scale. But it does show you where the growth of the industry is actually being achieved at the present moment in time. So you'd actually think this is a prime market for the generics, but the other way of looking at the industry is to add up the sales of the generic companies, which is what we do here. And we've done it with and without glyphosate, and you can see the impact of glyphosate. Now, 2009 was a difficult year for the global market. We saw the patented share was relatively static at about 28% by the product analysis, but you can see that the shares of the sales of the generic companies actually suffered like many of the sales of the multinationals did as well. So what is this telling you? The patented share was actually static. The generic share was actually declined. So the sector of the market which actually grew the most in 2009 was off-patent chemistry, which is actually sold by the major R&D driven companies. And what was the sector of the market which was likely to grow fastest in terms of R&D expenditure, which was shown in the ECPA study, was the post-launch development of products when they're actually on the market, or supporting off-patent products into different usages and different markets in the post-launch development side. So you can see with a slowdown of the marketplace that the competitive position of the industry in the recently off-patent products is increasing significantly. The major companies are responding to this with more R&D expenditure in that area to protect their interests. And even though the generics are a significant sector of the marketplace, it's not an easy industry for them to kind of partake in kind of otherwise. Now, the last slide to actually bring this back into kind of perspective again. Clearly, the research shows that it costs $254 million to bring a new product to the marketplace. So what is the return on that investment? And if you remember the graph we put together where we're looking at the sales of the products by their year of introduction, this is what this is again. But I've taken those sales and divided them by the number of active ingredients introduced in those years. So you're seeing the average return on those products in 2009 by their year of introduction. So if you're looking across the line, you can see it averages out around here. This is $80 million per year. So if you're expending $256 million for R&D on the product, but you're only getting $80 million per year back on average, and then you've got to add on the costs of manufacture and everything, it shows that the critical decisions which have to be taken by the R&D driven companies if they choose to bring the products to the market. Now clearly, there are some years where there's an exception, and you can see the big spikes. When you see these big spikes, though, and you look at what the list of products are, you can see that there is always some significant major products which actually contribute to that. Clearly, in this year, 2002, we have pyraclostrobin and clothianidin. The next spike, epoxiconazole and fipronil. The next spike, imidacloprid. Then acetochlorabamectin, metalaxyl, deltamethrin, glyphosate, which is actually way up here somewhere, and then paraquat as well. So again, the pressures on innovation from a cost perspective to what are commercial companies, and our stock quoted commercial companies now which have to respond to their kind of shareholders is actually quite significant. So the demand side for new chemistry is there. The regulatory side is getting stricter all the time, which makes the environment harder. But the commercial return in some ways makes it hard to justify maintaining that same level of R&D in the chemical crop protection sector. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Thank you for staying to the end. And if anybody has questions of anything at all about the industry, I'll be pleased to give you my thoughts at least. But thank you very much indeed.